Patrica Maslanka. My maiden name was McGovern. I remember growing up in Madison, New Jersey. My earliest recollection would be maybe 5 years old. I don't remember too much before that, except for when I look at pictures, you know. Growing up happy in a mostly Irish neighborhood and Italian neighborhood, which is really nice. And I went to Catholic school, and I remember my kindergarten nun. Her name was Sister Catherine Thomas. We had to walk to school, of course, and it wasn't that far, but it was cold. And I usually walked with my brother and sister, but I was the oldest, I was the youngest. So they were, my sister was 2 years older than I was, and my brother was 4 years older than I was. And we used to have a good time at school. We had a cafeteria where we ate down in the basement. And sometimes we brought our own lunch. Probably most of the time we made our own. And they would give us milk. And we played outside, a playground. And usually the girls played on one side and the boys played on the other side of the yard.
And what else did you do for fun?
For fun?
Did you like hiking or?
Well, we had a good time sleigh riding in the wintertime. We had a hill by us, and we'd go down, and somebody would be on the other side. If there was a car coming, they'd let me know. And we'd just go right across the street into a neighbor's yard and all the way down their hill. So it was a fun ride. But of course then we had to walk back up again. So we had a lot of fun. My mom showed me how to cook and bake. And she was from Ireland, so she taught me different recipes. A first job I had, well, that would be in high school. I worked in the 5 and 10 and measured ribbon. And I remember one time I needed some ribbon, so I rolled up some of the ribbon and stuck it in my shoe. I know it was stealing, but I still remember doing it, and I was so fearful about doing it, thinking I was going to get caught, but they weren't going to catch me if it was in my shoe, were they? But that was fun. That was right downtown, so I walked downtown. It wasn't that far. So sometimes I'd start right after school also. And on our way from school, my uncle had a store, an electric store, where he would fix irons and toasters, things like that. And then he would go out also to do bigger jobs. And my brother, he showed my brother how to be an electrician, and that's what he grew up to be, an electrician. And we would stop by, and my one aunt would work in the morning in his store, and the other one would work in the afternoon. So they'd always give us money. We'd go to the bakery probably and get some cupcake or something like that and walk home. And that was fun.
Yeah.
What shall I have? Oh, I had a terrible boss. It was a woman boss. She was awful. And she'd always watch me. I felt like she was watching me anyway. And if I was stargazing, she would say, what are you doing there, Pat? I said, I'm thinking about the job. Of course I wasn't, I was just stargazing, I guess you'd call it. But she was awful. It was a boring job, that's why.
What were you doing? What were you supposed to be doing?
We were supposed to be, right, supposed to be doing. What were we doing? Doing rewrites for a book. The book is called Martindale Hubbard. It was a lawyer's book. So we would update the lawyers' dates and everything. It was very boring. We're like 3 bosses. Why we needed 3 bosses, I have no idea. But they rolling around just watching to see if it worked. That was the worst job I ever had. I am still a very good speller because even my children ask me how to spell this and that. In fact, Richie asked me the other day, how do you spell exercise? From grade school, I went to high school, which was very different for us because we went to public school. And coming from Catholic school to public school, we were used to standing up for the nuns. So the teachers had to remind us, you don't have to stand for us. But not out of practice, you know, we would continue to stand. And they'd always tell us, and then we finally caught on, though, after a while. I belonged to several groups, choir group, played hockey, field hockey, that is. And I played basketball and baseball, of course. Softball. My mother came over when she was 16 with a handful of change wrapped up in a handkerchief. And of course, she was the last one to come because she was the youngest. That's why she was the last one. And she met up with her cousins, and we lived in Brooklyn, Prospect Avenue. My mother? Yeah, she came from Ballyshannon.
How do you spell it?
B-A-L-Y, Seychelles. Robbie still can't say that. And a lot of people came to the U.S. during the potato famine. She didn't have an easy life at all. A very hard life. In fact, when I visited Ireland, I went to see the farm where they grew up. And of course, it is now gone, but we went through the house. Of course, the roof had fallen in. But Robert, my son, and I, and in fact, Chris, you were with us, and we went through the house and got some. That's when you could take stuff aboard the plane without any problem. So.
Yeah.
Oh, it was all farmland. Definitely all farmland. But somehow you could see the town from the house. You could see the square of the house, of the church. She got a job as a housemaid. And that was in Madison. In fact, that's where she met my father. She worked on the 3rd floor, but she did have a hardship. The people that she lived with, the mother was pretty despondent because she had lost a child. And she was missing one day. and they were all looking all over for her, couldn't find her. But my mother found her. She had hung herself, and it was very traumatic for my mother, because she couldn't get over it for quite a while. In fact, there was an article written up in the paper about it, that my mother had found it, and the newspaper clipping was around for quite a while, because I remember reading it.
Oh.
My mother had it, yeah. She made a lot of friends, and there was a woman that was a very good cook. She taught my mother all the foods of the United States, and she had a lot of friends. And one took care of the children, and one taught the children too. So then she met my father. It was after the war, the first war. They met at a block dance in Madison, and he danced once with his sister, and the rest of the evening he danced with my mother. And I have the book that he had with all the songs that were played and her name in every spot. And the pencil is still attached to the book. They met and they married, and they decided to live in the same town, Madison, where she was working, because he was from there too. So they built a house next door to his mother, and mother and his sisters and brother. 98 Park Avenue. And my grandmother lived next door, which was 100 Park Avenue. Yeah, my father was a private in the Army, and he did make sergeant. He wasn't wounded or anything. He came back home safe and sound. He used to write to his mother and his sisters, and I have all of his letters also. I have it in the same spot as the card that I spoke about. There wasn't too much of a censoring of the letters at all. I guess maybe they didn't have to do it in those days. I remember the house cost $2,000 to build. And you could tell that he used different parts of old lumber, because when we did the house over, we found a lot of old lumber in the ceilings and up in the attic. So it was a 3-story house. But the attic, my mother's brother lived up in the attic. He lived with us for a while because he was married in Ireland, but his wife did not like it in Ireland, so she moved back. He had built a house for them too, and she went back to Ireland, and he stayed with us. And he worked for my father. My father worked on a farm, and he worked also with him. But my uncle would work in the Knights of Columbus. It was a meeting place, and he was the bartender, because he didn't drink. I guess he was a safe bartender. And we used to go down and have parties every so often. I remember when I was in high school, we used to do parties down there, and they caught me dancing on the bar at one time. Enough of that.
Aw.
Yeah, but that was fun to have him at the house. He was a lot of fun. Of course, he had a brogue, as my mother had a very thick brogue also. She would tell some stories about home, but not that many, because it was hard life for her. And I guess it was for him too. We had the kitchen on the bottom, a dining room, and a living room, of course. And we used to have doors in between each room because it would be cold. We had a cold stove furnace in the basement, which used coal, and the coal would be delivered by a truck, and it would be there would be I don't know what you would call it, but the coal was shoveled down into the basement, and of course then my father would open up the furnace and shove the coal in, and of course there were always ashes to take out. Upstairs, my mother and father had the biggest room, and my sister and I slept in one room, and my brother slept in the other bedroom. And then, of course, my uncle was up in the attic. The kitchen was very small, a small kitchen table, but it fit all of us. So we would usually use the dining room for holidays, usually. A lot of the furniture that came from the house where my mother worked, the husband had given my mother a lot of furniture. So even beds, dining room furniture. So they gave us quite a bit of furniture. So it helped them that they didn't have to buy any. But my father used to spend a lot of time over at my grandmother's house. So I used to have to go over and tell him to come home for dinner. Come on, Dad, come on home for dinner. Of course, that drove my mother crazy. What could you do? It was her husband's mother. Father just worked on a farm, and they didn't make very much money. So, but my father always had a big garden, and my mother would do a lot of canning. Everything, she would can everything. String beans, corn, because we had corn, and even fruit. I used to help her can peaches. They would go out and with my aunt next door. She was the driver. They drove down to the shore to buy peaches. Of course, they had a bad experience. She was driving in pouring rain, and she had an accident. And my mother was hurt very bad. She lost the sight of one eye, and she wore glasses with one lens was frosted. So she was like that until she died.
Wow.
With the frosted glass. She was very nervous. That's when my brother came home from the service. They gave him leave because of my mother. He had 30-day leave. And he would go out on dates, of course, and she would sit up and wait for him because she was so nervous about it. But then she came around, she got out of it. During the war, my father left the farm and went to work in an elevator. It was called Otis Elevator, and he made elevators for aircraft carriers.
Wow.
Yeah, so he used to work the night shift, and he would take the train from Madison into to his job. But sometimes when he'd come home late at night, he would he'd miss the train. He would be sleeping on the train. He'd forget to get off. Then he'd have to walk home from, like, say, Compensation, which was the next stop usually. Then he'd have to walk home. And of course, then he slept all day. So when we came home from school, we had to be very quiet because he had to go to work at night. I have to mention how I met my husband, of course, before I had these children. I met him through a friend of my sister's. She used to come to the house a lot, and my sister and she would go out drinking. And her name was Sophie. She would stay over at our house. And sometimes when they come home, they get home really late, and they'd have to climb up onto the roof and knock on the window, and they climbed in the window and wake me up. So the way I met him was from Sal, or Sophie. She gave me his address to write to him while he was in the Navy. So I wrote to him once, and I said, I don't know if I'll ever hear from you, but because I know you have a big family, you probably write them a lot of letters, but your sister asked me to write to you. I don't remember what I said, but I just incidentally stuff, I guess, how old I was and what I looked like. And he did write back to me once, and he said, well, maybe we'll meet sometime. So his brother, Eddie, was married to my sister. So there we were, we met and married two brothers. So we lived in Madison. He lived in Newark, and he would come up and pick me up. And we did a lot of bar hopping. Because I think I had my first drink when I was 17. A lot of bar hopping, and we had favorite bars, favorite places to go. We did bowling, but then he changed jobs, and we moved to California. There were 3 families that moved, and we each, the company picked out houses for us, but we didn't like the one they picked out for us, so we moved further out in the country, which was nice. And at one point, his sister and her husband came out to stay with us because he had lost his job. So he came out to California and stayed with us for quite a while. And then he got a job through Dad and went to school at night and became an engineer. And his wife also worked, so they got their own little apartment. Their children are still living in California. There was a big difference in California. Of course, I was lonesome, being so far away from everybody. My mother actually would have liked to come out to stay with me, but she did stay for a while and then went back. But she liked it there. We grew up very close to school. School was in our backyard. I didn't have the car because we couldn't afford a car, so we had one car. And then somebody sold him a junk, and he had his shift was a pipe. That's what he shifted the car with. We used to go to a lot of car races, so we always took the junky car. We lived in Santa Maria, California, which was between San Francisco and LA. Beautiful area, very nice area. But they had a rainy season also. And that's when because I used to hang clothes out. That's when I got my first dryer. So then when I moved to Indiana, the people asked me, did I can stuff? Because they were rural farmers, and they did a lot of canning. So they got me canning. So I canned just like my mother used to can. Everything, peaches, and I also made relish, which is still in the family recipe. And there's only one son that has relish left. I got it from Indiana, but I added to it. I added more things to it, and it's made with green tomatoes, carrots, onions, peppers. What else, Robbie?
Cabbage, celery.
Cabbage, yeah, cabbage, celery. Oh,
Mustard seed.
oh, of course, then the canning seasonings. Well, Richie was born like how many years after Robbie was, but in between I had lost a little boy, Stephen. But we had Richie pretty quick after that. Robbie mostly liked to be on his own. He'd wander the neighborhood. He had a lot of friends in the neighborhood wandering around. Sometimes I couldn't find him. I'd be out there hollering for him. Where was he? Up the street. Same thing with Brian. The two of them. They did the same thing. Taking off. Richie was a homebody though. I remember we were out Christmas shopping one time, and he had a white hoodie jacket on and jeans, I guess. And I was in a store, and all of a sudden I couldn't find him. So I asked everybody, did you see a little boy with a white sweatshirt on with a hood? Yeah, I saw him crossing the street. I said, what? Crossing the street? He saw a woman, he thought it was me, and he was following this woman. So I hollered, and the policeman grabbed a hold of him. And I said, that's mine, he's mine. So he brought him back to me. He didn't even know what he did. This trip was with Rita Birmingham was going to Greece. And this was after Daddy died. And she said, really? I said, yeah, I think I would like to do that. So she worked at Drew University, and she planned the whole trip, and I did it. And you didn't stop me after that. I did a lot of traveling, mostly with Drew, because it would be interesting because some of the people who had been there before were teachers, and we would meet every night and discuss the whole day, what we did, and I kept a journal of every trip, and I still have the journal. And I took a lot of pictures, and that was great. So we went to Greece was the first one. We did a trip on the Rhine, a trip to Hungary, Italy. We did Italy, and every trip was better than the last one. You know, I did it with a summer trips with my sister-in-law, Anne-Marie, but Drew was the most fun. Because we would do this, we did Greece twice, and it wasn't as much fun as it was with Drew, because Rita made it interesting.